Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time. I'd like to begin by paying tribute to all those who are not with us today, our men and women in uniform who serve across the globe defending our freedom. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines provide the mantle of security that allows us to meet in settings like these every day, and they should never be far from our minds. They and their families deserve our heartfelt thanks for their personal sacrifice. I know you share those sentiments as well. I also want to thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ms. Lowy, for your support through the process and for the expedited subcommittee markup that allows us to be here of last week, that allows us to be here this morning. Special thanks to Pete Visklowski for his partnership in this effort. We've spent a lot of time together with military leaders, representatives of the intelligence community, our membership. I thank him for his assistance, his collaboration, and his friendship. I'd be remiss if I did not recognize two departing members of our subcommittee, Andrew Crenshaw and Steve Israel, and thank them for their significant contributions. Please do give them a round of applause. I'd also like to recognize, as other chairs have before me, the remarkable work of our personal staff, and most particularly our professional staff that is arrayed behind me. They look to national priorities, they look to member priorities, they've considered yours, they've worked hard, they've done all sorts of remarkable things to put this bill together. I'll recognize them individually when we get to the floor, but their remarkable hard work on our behalf over the last couple of months putting this bill together deserves special recognition. I know you share the pride I have in the work that they do. Mr. Chairman, I rise to present the Defense Subcommittee's recommendation for fiscal year 2017's Department of Defense Appropriations bill. I also want to thank each member of the subcommittee for their loyal attendance at our many hearings and briefings that have helped shape this legislation. These meetings have allowed us to look in great detail into our national defense posture and the capabilities of our adversaries and our partners. We are concerned by what we see. Over the past several years, we've largely focused on the dangers posed by Islamic terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, barbaric ISIS, al-Nusra, and others in the Middle East and Africa. But in recent years, new threats have emerged. A more aggressive and capable Russia, an expansionist China, emboldened states like Iran, rogue nations like North Korea. At the same time, we're dealing with fiscal constraints imposed by sequestration and budget caps. Looking today at our Department of Defense and Intelligence community, we note our readiness levels are alarmingly low for our soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen. Our decisive technological edge over our adversaries is eroding. Our adversaries' resolve and their capability are only growing. The bill before you begins to reverse these trends by providing more money for national security. Our recommendation mirrors the funding structure that the House Armed Services Committee introduced a few weeks ago. It shifts $16 billion from the President's overseas contingency request into the base bill, while providing a bridge fund for our overseas operations through the end of April of next year. At that time, the new Commander-in-Chief will be able to assess our defense posture, reevaluate readiness levels and recapitalization efforts, and request a targeted supplemental to support our troops. I'm confident that members of this committee will work in a bipartisan way to ensure that this essential supplemental appropriations legislation is passed when the time comes. Rest assured, we will never let our troops down. By providing a bridge fund to next April, rather than an entire year of funding, this bill is able to make targeted investments in additional manning for the Army, Marines, and Air Force, more training, as well as equipment they rely on, all designed to repair the worrisome readiness gaps we see across our armed services. Funding for base requirement totals $532.8 billion, $15.1 billion above the President's request. In order to make every dollar count, we've exercised oversight responsibilities vigorously and reduce funding for programs that have seen unjustified cost increases, been subject to contract or schedule delays, been restructured or terminated, including funding requested addressing funding and requested ahead of need, and addressing the whole issue of historical under-execution. As a result of this work, and may I again commend the staff and the members, we're able to increase funding for the number of troops, adding 52,000, 27 for the active military and 25,000 for the Guard and Reserves, and their training by $9.4 billion over the President's request. And for equipment, the service chiefs have requested in their unmet needs list to approximately $9.6 billion. These investments will allow our military services to fully meet critical training requirements such as training, flying hours, and ground training, improve our facilities, and increase the number of troops to reverse years of reductions. The recommendation ensures that our military and intelligence community are able to rebuild their advantages over our near-peer adversaries. We currently have the lowest manning level in the Army since before World War II. And this legislation boosts Army and Marine Corps end strength. Our Navy fleet is now smaller than at any time before World War I. And this bill funds a significant increase in shipbuilding. Our Air Force is flying the oldest fleet in its entire history. And this measure boosts modernization of our fighters, bombers, tankers, and other aircraft. I also want to note that our legislation again includes $500 million to continue our investment in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, what we call ISR, for our combatant commanders. We've heard from them. I think all of us are pleased by the aggressiveness with which the Department of Defense has used these additional resources that we've provided, and we look forward to working with them in fiscal year 2017. Mr. Chairman, as I close, I want to make an observation about this year's debate. The President's spokesman and Secretary of Defense were quick to criticize the funding structure of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Bill, and indeed this morning's proposal. The White House and Secretary Carter have suggested we are gambling with the troops' mission in the Middle East. What was really gambling was the administration's decision to pull our troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan against the advice of our military leadership and not anticipate the resulting vacuum would be filled by ISIS, the Taliban, and other terrorist groups. What was gambling was ousting Gaddafi in Libya without a plan for the aftermath. It is gambling to believe that Iran will not violate many aspects of the Geneva Agreement. It is gambling to believe that the American people would not pay close attention to increased U.S. military operations in Syria and Iraq if the President simply refused to call them combat operations. It was gambling to establish a poorly thought out and poorly executed train and equip scheme in Syria, an expensive gamble. It was gambling that China and Russia would cease their aggressive challenges to American superiority in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic if only we backed away. My friends, one thing that we can all agree on is that the last few years of budget cuts and constant deployments have only eroded our readiness and capabilities. The bill before you does not gamble. Rather, this proposal wisely invests more money for our troops, more money for training, badly needed, modern equipment, expanded cybersecurity, more intelligence gathering capability, and yes, better health care outcomes for our troops and their families. The Constitution is quite clear. It says the primary job of Congress is to provide for the common defense. The bill before you allows us to fill that important responsibility in an increasingly dangerous world. I thank you for your close attention, and I urge adoption of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee.